Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban's nationalist rhetoric and embrace of culture wars has long since soured his standing among other leaders in Europe. But what isolates him among his European colleagues has endeared him to the American right.
Immigration has been one of the most contentious issues in Europe over the past decade, especially following the 2015 migrant crisis when millions of people fled war-torn regions such as Syria, Afghanistan, and Iraq, seeking refuge in Europe. This influx of migrants sparked intense debate across the continent, with different nations adopting a variety of approaches to manage the situation. While many countries struggled to balance humanitarian concerns with security and economic stability, Hungary took a distinct and assertive stance. Under the leadership of Prime Minister Viktor Orban, Hungary implemented a series of stringent policies that it claims have effectively destroyed the immigration crisis within its borders.
The West is at war with itself.
He painted Hungary and white Christian Americans as allies in the struggle against a progressive global order.
I am here to tell you that our values, the nation, Christian roots, and family, can be successful in the political battlefield.
These policies, while controversial, have been touted by Orban's government as a model for other European countries facing similar challenges. This video delves into the methods Hungary employed to tackle the immigration crisis, the impact of these measures, and the broader implications for Europe and global migration policy. Before we start, please don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more updates. Hungary's approach to immigration can be traced back to the early days of the 2015 migrant crisis. As hundreds of thousands of migrants made their way through the Balkans towards Western Europe, Hungary found itself on a major transit route. The Hungarian government, led by Prime Minister Viktor Orban and his Fidesz party, was quick to frame the situation as not just a humanitarian issue, but a national security threat. Orban argued that uncontrolled migration could undermine Hungary's cultural identity, threaten public safety, and strain the country's social services. In response, Hungary began implementing a series of measures aimed at halting the flow of migrants across its borders.
When you're stopped from walking through, you run. Child in arms, heart racing, exhausted from being on the move.
Going to Budapest.
But you keep running, because somewhere among the million stalks, there must be sanctuary. Somehow, through the open fields, you might defy closed borders.
The first major step was the construction of a barbed wire fence along Hungary's southern borders with Serbia and Croatia in the summer of 2015. This move was widely criticized by the international community, with some comparing it to the construction of the Berlin Wall. However, the Hungarian government defended the fence as a necessary measure to protect the country's sovereignty and the European Union's external borders. The fence, combined with the deployment of thousands of police and military personnel to the border, significantly reduced the number of migrants entering Hungary. In addition to physical barriers, Hungary introduced a series of legal measures designed to deter migrants from entering the country. One of the most significant was the introduction of the so-called Stop Soros law in 2018, named after the Hungarian-American billionaire George Soros, who had been a vocal advocate for migrant rights and had funded organizations that supported migrants. The law criminalized activities related to aiding undocumented migrants, including providing legal assistance, food, or shelter.
On one side, Serbia. On the other, Hungary and the European Union. The men pictured are migrants. With these ladders, they can climb 2 fences topped with barbed wire. Each ladder costs €200, paid to smugglers. These men successfully make the journey into Hungary. In these images, a male migrant can be seen retracting his ladder as the Hungarian police arrive.
NGOs and individuals found guilty of such activities could face fines or even imprisonment. The Stop Soros law was part of a broader legislative package that included amendments to Hungary's asylum laws. These amendments made it nearly impossible for migrants to apply for asylum in Hungary. For example, the law stipulated that any migrant who had passed through a safe third country, such as Serbia, on their way to Hungary, was ineligible for asylum. This effectively meant that almost no one could claim asylum in Hungary, as most migrants had traveled through several countries before reaching its borders. The law also introduced new penalties for illegal border crossings, including up to 5 years in prison for those caught entering Hungary without authorization. The combination of physical barriers and harsh legal measures led to a dramatic decrease in the number of migrants attempting to enter Hungary. In 2015, over 400,000 migrants crossed into Hungary. By 2018, that number had dropped to just a few thousand.
Migrants make the journey under the cover of darkness. Many groups make their way through the forest towards the border. This Syrian man and his family have tried several times to make the crossing.
4 times.
4 times?
4 times, yes. Yeah, before the snow we are keep trying again.
Okay.
The goal for those crossing in the day is the same, to make it into the EU.
Prime Minister Orban has been one of the most vocal opponents of immigration in Europe. He has consistently portrayed immigration as an existential threat to Hungary and European civilization. Orban has argued that mass migration, particularly from Muslim-majority countries, would lead to the erosion of Europe's Christian identity and the rise of social unrest and terrorism. This rhetoric has resonated with many Hungarians, particularly in rural areas, who have felt left behind by globalization and are wary of cultural change. Orban's anti-immigration stance has also been central to his political strategy. By framing himself as the defender of Hungary and Europe against the invasion of migrants, Orban has been able to galvanize his base and win elections with large majorities. His Fidesz party has dominated Hungarian politics since 2010, and Orban has used his mandate to consolidate power, including undermining the independence of the judiciary and the media. Critics argue that Orban's anti-immigration policies are part of a broader authoritarian agenda, aimed at stifling dissent and maintaining his grip on power. Hungary's hardline approach to immigration has been met with significant criticism from the international community, particularly the European Union. The EU has accused Hungary of violating its commitments under international law, including the 1951 Refugee Convention, which obliges countries to provide protection to those fleeing persecution. The European Commission launched infringement procedures against Hungary, arguing that its asylum laws and the Stop Soros law were incompatible with EU law. Tensions between Hungary and the EU have also been exacerbated by Orban's refusal to participate in the EU's migrant relocation scheme.
Hungary and Poland don't like the new rules, which allow the relocation of asylum seekers and payments into a common fund for each one they refuse to take in. Poland says its hosting of 1 million Ukrainians should exempt it, and priority should go to building stronger borders. But the rules have already been approved, with little prospect of a rewrite. In the end, leaders agreed to not agree. EU Council President Charles Michel issued his own statement instead.
Under this scheme, member states were expected to share the burden of resettling migrants who had arrived in frontline countries like Greece and Italy. However, Hungary, along with several other Central and Eastern European countries, refused to accept any migrants, arguing that the scheme violated their sovereignty. The Hungarian government's defiance has led to a broader debate within the EU about the future of European integration. Orban has positioned himself as the leader of a group of countries that oppose further EU centralization and advocate for a Europe of sovereign nations. This has put Hungary on a collision course with countries like Germany and France, which support deeper integration and have called for greater solidarity in managing the migrant crisis. While Hungary's policies have effectively reduced the number of migrants entering the country, they have also had significant social and economic consequences.
We consider it unfair that often we're being accused of having a lack of solidarity in Germany. And I want to tell you that 8,000 guards are stationed along the border, 24 hours a day, protecting a border that would let migrants into Germany if they passed it. If armed Hungarian guards did not protect the Hungarian-Serbia and Hungarian-Croatia borders, 4,000 to 5,000 migrants would come to Germany every day. We are protecting them. This is solidarity, a pretty good solidarity. This is Hungary's border with Serbia, which was built specifically to keep out illegal immigrants during the crisis in 2015 after saying the EU was too slow to act.
One of the most visible impacts has been the rise in anti-immigrant sentiment and xenophobia in Hungarian society. Orban's rhetoric, combined with a government-funded media campaign that portrayed migrants as criminals and terrorists, has contributed to a climate of fear and hostility towards foreigners. This has not only affected migrants, but also Hungary's small minority communities, including Roma and Jewish populations, who have reported an increase in discrimination and hate crimes. The government's anti-Soros campaign has also been criticized for stoking anti-Semitism, as it has often used imagery and language that play on anti-Jewish stereotypes. Economically, Hungary's anti-immigration policies have had mixed results. On the one hand, Orban has argued that by keeping out migrants, Hungary has avoided many of the social and economic challenges faced by Western European countries, such as unemployment, crime, and strain on public services. On the other hand, Hungary is facing a demographic crisis.
Hungary's fence, in the view of the government in Budapest, an heroic effort to preserve European identity against Islam. To make things harder still for anyone on the Serbian side who might harbour thoughts of sneaking through, the fence has been electrified. Not strong enough to hurt, but to set off alarms. The numbers trying to get through have fallen.
It's like some voice, some alarm. When they touch it, they will alarm here, and it will make a really loud song here, loud alarm, like don't go to Hungary, it's forbidden, and there is a transit zone, you can go and register there.
With one of the lowest birth rates in Europe and a rapidly aging population, many economists argue that Hungary needs immigration to address labor shortages and support its pension system. However, the government has instead focused on policies aimed at increasing the birth rate, such as offering financial incentives for families to have more children. Despite the criticism, some European politicians have looked to Hungary as a model for managing immigration. Leaders from countries like Poland, Italy, and Austria have praised Orban's approach.
The cover of darkness. Many groups make their way through the forest towards the border. This Syrian man and his family have tried several times to make the crossing.
4 times.
4 times?
4 times, yes. Yeah, before the snow we are keep trying again.
Okay.
The goal for those crossing in the day is the same, to make it into the EU.
Which country are you from?
Oh, no speaking English, no speaking.
Afghanistan? Afghanistan.
Among the hundreds of men, Afghans, Tunisians, Kurds and Indians, some wearing sandals, despite the freezing temperatures. Every one of them paying huge sums to smugglers in an attempt to make the crossing.
And have called for similar measures in their own countries. This has led to the emergence of a broader European coalition of nationalist and right-wing populist parties that share Orban's views on immigration in the EU. These parties argue that the EU's liberal immigration policies have failed and that countries have the right to protect their borders and preserve their cultural identity. They advocate for a Fortress Europe approach, which would involve stricter border controls, the construction of physical barriers, and the rejection of migrant quotas. However, critics argue that this approach is not only morally wrong but also impractical in the long term. They point out that Europe is facing a range of challenges, including an aging population, labor shortages, and the need for skilled workers, which cannot be addressed without some level of immigration.
Hungary's right-wing government is cracking down on undocumented immigrants trying to enter the country and those who help them. The country's parliament passed a law banning individuals or groups from, quote, facilitating illegal immigration. That means anyone helping refugees seek asylum or campaigning for asylum seekers could face jail time. The bill is called the Stop Soros Law, after Hungarian-American billionaire George Soros. Prime Minister Viktor Orban strengthened his party's hold on parliament to a 2/3 majority by running a strong anti-immigrant campaign and demonizing Soros. The billionaire runs a foundation that has advocated for refugees, though the group recently left Hungary amid the, quote, increasingly repressive political and legal environment. Parliament also passed a constitutional amendment that bans any, quote, alien population from settling in Hungary. That's seen as a direct response to the European Union's attempt to settle a set number of immigrants in each member state.
They also warn that the rise of nationalism and anti-immigrant sentiment is threatening the stability and unity of the EU and could lead to a return to the kind of nationalist rivalries that have plagued Europe in the past. While Hungary's government touts the success of its immigration policies, the human cost of these measures has been significant. Thousands of migrants have been stranded in makeshift camps in Serbia, unable to enter Hungary or move on to other European countries. These camps often lack basic amenities, and residents live in squalid conditions, facing harsh winters and limited access to medical care. There have also been reports of abuse and mistreatment by Hungarian border guards, including beatings, the use of pepper spray, and the forced return of migrants to Serbia without processing their asylum claims. These actions have been condemned by human rights organizations, which argue that Hungary is violating its obligations under international law. In addition to those stranded at the border, many migrants who did manage to enter Hungary have found it difficult to integrate into society. The Hungarian government has done little to support the integration of refugees and asylum seekers, and many have struggled to find work, housing, and access to education and healthcare. This has led to a situation where many migrants live in poverty and social isolation, with little hope of building a new life in Hungary. However, the long-term sustainability of Hungary's approach remains in question. While the country has largely succeeded in keeping out migrants and refugees, it is unclear how it will address the broader demographic and economic challenges that it faces without the contribution of immigrants.
For a political bloc which has been so critical of separation walls elsewhere, the European Union is looking pretty good at closing itself off. This appears to be the most profound expression of Fortress Europe, the start of a fence aimed at shutting down access to the EU at its border between Hungary and Serbia. It's a pretty safe bet that almost none of the Syrians or Iraqis or Afghans who might want to cross over this border have any particular intention of staying in Hungary, but for the government here, that doesn't seem to be the point. The European Union's member states were asked to decide exactly how many refugees they were prepared to resettle. Hungary has ended up bottom of that list. The government said it was prepared to take precisely no people.
Hungary's population is aging rapidly, and the country is experiencing significant labor shortages in key sectors such as healthcare, construction, and agriculture. Orban's government has attempted to address these issues through pro-natalist policies aimed at encouraging Hungarians to have more children, but so far, these measures have had limited success. One of the cornerstones of Hungary's strategy to combat its demographic crisis has been its aggressive pro-natalist policies. Orban has introduced a range of financial incentives aimed at encouraging Hungarian families to have more children. These include offering interest-free loans to young couples, which are partially forgiven with the birth of each child, and providing subsidies for the purchase of large family cars and homes. Additionally, mothers with 4 or more children are exempt from paying income tax for life. The government has also invested heavily in expanding childcare services, including building new nurseries and kindergartens, to make it easier for parents to balance work and family life. While these policies have been popular among many Hungarians, their effectiveness in reversing the country's demographic decline is still uncertain. Birth rates have increased slightly since the introduction of these measures, but Hungary's population continues to shrink overall. Demographers point out that it is difficult to reverse long-term population trends quickly, and that even with increased birth rates, it will take decades to significantly alter the country's demographic trajectory. Furthermore, critics argue that Hungary's pro-natalist policies are overly focused on traditional family structures and fail to address the needs of a more diverse and modern society. For example, the government's emphasis on large families has been criticized as exclusionary towards single parents, same-sex couples, and women who choose not to have children. Additionally, some have questioned the sustainability of these policies, arguing that they place a significant burden on the state budget and may not be economically viable in the long run.
I see my wife, she kill or somebody kill her, I will not stay there in my country, in the government, my government, he killed this people, I will not stay there, I will go to any country.
Busloads of others arrive. A large group of mostly Afghan children devour the small amount of food the volunteers can offer. Their hope is in this piece of paper written in Hungarian, which says they're asylum seekers. But once the police drop them off, they're put alone onto the next train to Budapest, where it's anyone's guess what will become of them. Some are so young. Hungary's lack of interest in them is a total contrast to the money it's spending on the fence.
Hungary's restrictive immigration policies have also had significant economic implications. On the one hand, Orban's government argues that by keeping out migrants, Hungary has avoided many of the social and economic challenges faced by Western European countries, such as unemployment, crime, and pressure on public services. However, the lack of immigration has also exacerbated Hungary's labor shortages, particularly in sectors like healthcare, manufacturing, and agriculture, where there is a growing need for workers. To address these shortages, the Hungarian government has turned to alternative sources of labor, including guest worker programs and efforts to encourage the return of Hungarian expatriates from abroad. However, these measures have had limited success, and many industries continue to struggle with a lack of skilled workers. Some businesses have been forced to close or relocate due to the difficulty of finding employees, while others have resorted to hiring workers from outside the EU, particularly from Ukraine and Serbia. The labor shortages have also driven up wages in some sectors, leading to increased costs for businesses and potentially reducing Hungary's competitiveness in the global market. At the same time, the lack of immigration has limited the country's potential for economic growth, as there are fewer workers to contribute to the economy and support the pension system. Hungary's approach to immigration has put it at odds with the European Union, leading to a strained relationship between Budapest and Brussels. The EU has launched multiple infringement procedures against Hungary, arguing that its asylum policies and the Stop Soros law violate EU law and international human rights standards. In response, Orban has positioned himself as a defender of Hungarian sovereignty against what he describes as the overreach of EU institutions. This tension has been further exacerbated by Orban's refusal to participate in the EU's migrant relocation scheme.
Orban's white nationalist ideology has isolated him from other European Union leaders, and he's incurred sanctions from the European Union. He's adopted anti-immigration policies and has campaigned against the LGBTQ community.
We decided we don't need more genders, we need more rangers. Less drag queens and more Chuck Norris.
Over the last 12 years, Orban successfully transformed Hungary's democracy into an autocracy. Experts in autocratic governments warn that Orban is giving Republicans a blueprint to replicate. Shepley describes Orban as a legalistic autocrat, someone who dismantles the law to achieve their constitutional aims.
When you see that Orban wins these overwhelming election majorities,
which was designed to distribute asylum seekers more evenly across member states, Hungary, along with several other Central and Eastern European countries, has consistently refused to accept any migrants under this scheme, arguing that it violates their sovereignty and the will of their people. The standoff between Hungary and the EU has broader implications for the future of European integration. Orban has emerged as a leading figure in a growing coalition of nationalist and right-wing populist parties across Europe that are skeptical of the EU and advocate for a Europe of sovereign nations. This coalition has gained strength in recent years, particularly in countries like Poland, Italy, and Austria, where similar parties have come to power or gained significant influence. These developments have led to concerns about the future cohesion of the EU. Some fear that the rise of nationalist and populist movements could undermine the European project, leading to greater fragmentation and possibly even the breakup of the Union. Others argue that the EU needs to reform in order to address the legitimate concerns of these movements.
Eventually discussed relations with China. The EU has a $250 billion trade relationship with Beijing, but it is being reassessed. Most leaders want to repatriate manufacturing in key areas, mainly high-tech, to avoid the kind of dependency many develop for Russian oil and gas. They're calling it de-risking. The final statement recognized growing tensions and rivalries, but called for constructive and stable relations.
All in all, this means continued engagement with China, but following a European approach that is based on our interests and on our values.
There is little appetite here for the kind of strategic reset the Biden administration wants. Yet again, migration has proved a divisive issue,
such as the perceived loss of national sovereignty and the challenges posed by immigration. Hungary's immigration policies have not only sparked controversy within the EU, but have also drawn attention from other parts of the world. In particular, Hungary has become a point of reference for other countries facing similar challenges with migration. Leaders from countries such as the United States, Brazil, and Australia have praised Hungary's approach and have considered adopting similar measures in their own countries. For example, former U.S. President Donald Trump, who made immigration a central issue of his administration, expressed admiration for Orban's policies and invited him to the White House in 2019. During their meeting, Trump praised Hungary's efforts to secure its borders and prevent illegal immigration, and the two leaders discussed their shared views on sovereignty and national security. Hungary's approach has also resonated with right-wing and nationalist movements around the world, who see it as a model for defending national identity and resisting the pressures of globalization. These movements have often cited Hungary's policies as an example of how countries can protect themselves from the perceived threats of mass migration, cultural change, and the erosion of national sovereignty. However, Hungary's approach has also been criticized by many in the international community who argue that it undermines human rights and sets a dangerous precedent. Human rights organizations, including Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, have condemned Hungary's treatment of migrants and asylum seekers, arguing that its policies violate international law and contribute to the suffering of vulnerable people. These organizations have called on the EU and the broader international community to hold Hungary accountable and to ensure that it upholds its obligations under international human rights treaties. The Hungarian government has been highly effective in using media and propaganda to shape public opinion on immigration. Orban's government has maintained tight control over much of the country's media landscape, using state-owned outlets and pro-government private media to disseminate its anti-immigration message.
The German Chancellor and Hungarian Prime Minister clashed on the migration issue. It's after Angela Merkel and Viktor Orban met and discussed, amongst many things, the topic of migrants and borders. They couldn't agree on the responsibilities Europe has towards refugees seeking sanctuary on the continent. That's probably what separates us, that humanity is the soul of Europe, and if we want to protect this soul, if Europe with its values wants to play a role in the world, then Europe cannot simply close its eyes from the need and from the suffering. But Hungary's anti-migration Prime Minister says Europe's best show of humanity is by removing incentives for refugees to go to the continent.
This media campaign has portrayed migrants as criminals, terrorists, and economic parasites, creating a climate of fear and hostility towards foreigners. The government has also used billboards, television ads, and social media to promote its message. For example, during the 2018 parliamentary election campaign, the government launched a series of billboard ads depicting George Soros alongside images of migrants, with the slogan, "Let's not let Soros have the last laugh." These ads were part of a broader campaign to link Soros, who is of Hungarian Jewish descent, to the migration crisis and to portray him as a puppet master orchestrating the influx of migrants into Europe. Critics argue that this media campaign has contributed to the rise of xenophobia and hate speech in Hungary. The portrayal of migrants as a threat to national security and cultural identity has fueled public support for the government's hardline policies and has made it more difficult for opposition parties and civil society organizations to advocate for a more humane approach to immigration. The government's control over the media has also limited the ability of independent journalists and media outlets to challenge the official narrative.
This week they hosted the Egyptian President Sisi in Budapest and welcomed him as a friend in the fight against what the Hungarian Prime Minister called extremist ideologies.
There are several million migrants in Egypt whose containment is placing extraordinary burdens on the country. We're following these efforts with appreciation.
Many independent media outlets have been forced to close or have been bought out by pro-government businessmen, further narrowing the space for critical voices in Hungary's media landscape. This has led to concerns about the erosion of press freedom and the health of democracy in Hungary. While Hungary's approach to immigration has been controversial, it has also had a significant impact on European migration policy. Orban's stance has influenced the broader debate on migration within the EU, pushing the issue to the forefront of the European political agenda. His policies have been echoed by other countries in Central and Eastern Europe, as well as by right-wing populist parties across the continent. If you liked this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us, what impact will Hungary's solution have on Europe? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.